Hi, I'm Peter J. Rea. Welcome. Today's topic is Gertrude Zuck Rea, 1898 to 1985. Gertrude Zuck Rea was a granddaughter of Tom Zuck and the niece of Nettie Zuck, and she was also my father's mother, so she was my grandmother. And she wrote about her life back around 1979. Today's talk was originally published as a Zuck Family Memories Collection, number 12, on September 25th, 1988. This story is written in response to a letter from my grandson, Peter John Rea, which is here quoted in part. Due to your many years of existence on this earth, you undoubtedly have many recollections, observations, and conclusions stored in your brain. I would like for you to write down anything which you think your grandson might find interesting, or should know about your life and experiences and words of wisdom. Don't feel any pressure about this, but take all the time you need, months in fact. I have much love and respect for you, Grandma, and would like something to carry through my life to read and reread written by you. In going over my early life, I find many long-forgotten stories stored in my brain. For the most part, it was a happy time, which I appreciate all over again from the vantage point of over 80 years. As I remember, on Friday, September 23, 1898, at 3:30 p.m., 373 Windsor Street, Marion, Ohio, Grandmother Hecker brought me into the Zuck family according to the record in the Big Family Bible. Father, Mother, Mary, John, and Helen were the family at that time. A little sister Dora, born after Mary had died before John was born. One of my earliest memories is of our mother. She was walking from the living room into the parlor, and she was singing. She was wearing a pale green dress trimmed with black lace. She was delicately built, had wavy dark hair, fair complexion, and dark eyes. I think she was one of my first impressions of gentleness, love, and beauty. Mother's family was her life. She loved children, and she thought all babies were beautiful. Her energy was amazing, and she worked tirelessly to keep her family clean, warm, and well-fed. She was unswerving in her desire that her children should get good educations. Kindness and hospitality were a way of life with her, and her innate refinement was an example to all of us. She made a house a home, and she lived past her 99th birthday. One of our neighbors, a Mrs. Berry, came to visit often. She was well along in years and very deaf. Mother had to shout to make her hear, but she always took time to be kind and gracious, even though her days were very busy. Her kindness was a way of life, and many a time she fed a hungry man who came to our back door for a meal. Our father was of medium height, dark eyes and hair, and had a strong physique. I remember the funny, wispy little curl on top of his head. He usually wore a mustache, and I loved to watch him shave with a long, black-handled razor. That foamy white lather disappeared like magic. The world of nature was intensely interesting to our father. Its moods and forms were to him manifestations of the Almighty. He used that term often. I remember sitting on the front porch with him while we watched the approach of a thunderstorm. How he enjoyed the power of it. Though essentially a religious man, the turning point in his life came during an evangelistic meeting in the Methodist Church in Marion, Ohio. He had gone to that meeting a young adult, nervous and unsettled. He had been married for a few years, had a wife and young children, and his life was in turmoil. Admitting this and committing himself to the forgiveness and care of Jesus Christ and relying on him for guidance, our father became a changed man, happy, outgoing, forgiving. His faith as a Christian never wavered from that time on, and he lived over 87 years. Father was a student of the Bible. Our days started with family devotions, Bible reading, and Father praying, and all of us on our knees. We probably needed that quiet time, for we were lively and restless. Our father really lived what he believed, and he had extraordinary integrity. Example is better than precept was a guiding principle of his life. The Youth's Companion, the Epworth Herald, and the Christian Advocate were some of the magazines in our home. Some of the books were the Peterson magazine books and a big set of encyclopedia. Mark Twain and his humor were enjoyed by our father, and he loved good jokes and had quite a repertoire. I loved to hear him laugh. He spoke often of Dwight L. Moody and his thinking. I never heard him use profanity. After a hard day's work at the Marion steam shovel, Father would often read to us, usually from the Youth's Companion. We could hardly wait for the continued stories, and our brother Fred would get the magazine, put Father's slippers beside his chair, and Father read the next chapter of those exciting stories. On Sundays we went to church, a long mile from our house, and we walked, rain or shine. Our Father took us, and it was in this Epworth Methodist Church that we were baptized. In the kindergarten was a teacher, Aunt Lena Gregg, who was a sister of your great-great-grandfather, Thomas Felton Zuck. I remember Aunt Lena. She was jolly, blue-eyed, brown-haired, full of laughter. She was amply built, a comfortable person, and we loved her in that long-ago Sunday school. The church service was upstairs in the big auditorium with choir loft, pipe organ, and stained glass windows. I spent a lot of time while the minister was preaching looking at the beautiful windows over the east balcony. There were angels in them. The minister usually wore a long black frock coat and prayed on bended knee beside the big front altar. The organ pealed, the church sang anthems, and often gifted soloists performed. The congregation sang many of the hymns still sung in churches today, and that music was the best part of the service. Father had a good voice, and I loved to hear him join the singing, and felt happy and secure holding his hand. On the way home, we often stopped to visit at Aunt Priscilla Bowen's house, which was near the church. Now this aunt of our father's was one of 5 sisters of your great-great-grandfather Zuck, and it was in her house that some of the walnut furniture he had made was in evidence. He was a carpenter by trade and also had painted stage scenery for the old Wigwam Theater in Marion. His life was short, 33 years, and his early death was probably caused by the hardships which he had endured in the Civil War. His portrait is still in the home at 373 Windsor Street, Marion, Ohio. He is buried in Marion Cemetery, Marion, Ohio, and his name and rank are inscribed on the inside south wall of the Civil War Memorial Chapel there. He left a wife and 3 children, Annette Lenore, Edwin, and Thomas Frank, your great-grandfather Zuck. Annette Lenore became a milliner's apprentice, and the 2 little boys were raised in the Soldiers and Sailors Orphanage home in Xenia, Ohio. I don't know much about Grandmother Zuck except that she was raised in a home of luxury in Marysville, Ohio, had a beautiful voice, and went to college in Wittenberg, Ohio. Her maiden name was Anna Filler, and she had a short life, 45 years. As a little girl, I loved to climb the big apple trees in our yard. The one outside the window in the upstairs south bedroom had a robin's nest in the upper branches, and we watched the daily drama that went on there. On the lower branches of this tree we hung our Easter baskets, and it was fun to go out early on Easter morning and find the colored eggs. I remember my basket was dark pink, and I really liked that little basket. Other trees that became our friends were the big chestnut trees in the yard north of us. Auntie Dumble, an English lady and not our real aunt, lived over there, and we always liked her for she was kind and understanding. Now those chestnut trees had long feathery blossoms and prickly burrs formed. Inside the burrs were the chestnuts. In the fall the burrs split open and fell to the ground. We loved to go out and gather the brown chestnuts from the burrs and to examine the insides of those burrs. They were like satin. Another joy in the yard next door was the spring beauties that grew beneath the chestnut trees. I think there were some violets too. Anyway, it was the spring beauties especially that told us winter was over and spring had come. We loved to pick bouquets of those little flowers, and we found that their pink striped petals closed at night. When I was 4 years old, our family physician, Dr. Lewis, did a remarkable surgery in removing a brown birthmark from my right cheek. I have been grateful to him all of my life. The operation was done on the kitchen table under general anesthetic, chloroform, and it took several hours. Before it began, I sang, "Jesus knows all about our troubles." That particular trouble turned out just fine, and Mother rubbed olive oil on the scar to help the healing process. I was anxious to, quote, "look like other little girls." I must have been a terrific tomboy, had my own bag of commies and agates, and played marbles out in the alley with the neighborhood boys. A good ball game couldn't be missed. I had to join and sometimes got spanked for playing ball when I should have been doing household chores. Each of us had our own jobs and we had to finish them. Climbing trees was another of my specialties. One particular feat was the day I climbed to the top of our grandparents' tall evergreen tree. The view up there was sensational. I could even see the downtown courthouse. One special treat was when we went over to Hazen's ice cream factory on the next street. We would take a big bowl and have it filled with vanilla ice cream from one of their big freezers. It was wonderful ice cream. Then, too, going to Mr. Smith's grocery store a short block down Windsor Street to get all-day suckers was a reward for digging weeds from our yard. If we could salvage a few pennies from our labors, away we went, and the trip was a success, unless we lost our pennies down the cracks in the boardwalks along the way. Stone or concrete sidewalks were unknown in our neighborhood. In those early years of my life, there was no city water in our home, no gas, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. Cooking was with a big cast-iron stove in the kitchen, which was either wood or coal-fired. Heating was with a hard coal stove in the living room with a register in the ceiling above it to help heat the upstairs. Water for general cleaning was from a rainwater cistern connected with a pump in the kitchen. Drinking water came from a well in the backyard. Bathing on Saturday night was in a big laundry tub. Outside toilets were at the far ends of backyards. Our evenings were lighted with coal oil lamps with glass chimneys. It must have been difficult to keep the family clean, warm, and healthy, but our parents did a very good job. When a real epidemic hit the neighborhood, Mother would put sulfur on the hot kitchen stove lids, and I can still see those blue flames and remember the acrid odor. We were bathed on Saturday night in a big laundry tub in the kitchen, and Mother used green carbolic soap for this rite and rubbed us dry until we shone. Recreation, for the most part, was thought up by the neighborhood kids. When a make-believe wedding was planned, Helen would usually be the bride, and Aunt Edith would be the preacher. The ceremony would take place in the lawn tent in the backyard. I remember that once Helen's veil was made from a lace curtain with beads and was brought over by a neighborhood boy who was the groom. The wedding trip was a ride in a wheelbarrow. Hide-and-seek, mumbly-peg, hopscotch, and baseball were some of our best games. I mustn't forget marbles played out in the alley. Once in a while, a German band came by and played under our grandparents' street lamp. Occasionally, an organ grinder and his little monkey would appear. In those days, a lamplighter with a long pole came around at dusk to light the street lamps. If a fishing outing was planned, we hunted night crawlers by lantern light. Our childhood did have some problems. I remember that I thought our sister Mary was our parents' favorite. I strongly resented our brother John's teasing. I couldn't understand our sister Helen's impatience with me when we were practicing, and her dislike of doing unattractive household chores. Our brother Fred's penchant for settling things with his fists. One day he and our cousin Bob Hecker had a fight that lasted all day, only taking time out to rest between rounds. Our brother Ted was gentle, occupied with the whys and hows of his environment. The younger children, Lenore, Rachel, and Tommy, were too young to give me any competition, and besides, they were pretty lovable. We evidently did know a little of what was going on outside of our own little world, because Helen wanted to be like Alice Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt's daughter, and I wanted to be like Catherine Paderewski, the musician's daughter. Our grandmother Hecker was a big influence in our growing up. She had come from Germany when she was a small child and had married young to a Mr. Strasser. They had one son, and one day her husband walked away and never returned. Her second husband was much older than our grandmother. He was Dr. Hecker, a farmer who had come from Alsace-Lorraine. He was a widower with 3 children when he married our grandmother. This marriage resulted in 12 children, and our mother was one of them. Between the 3 families, there were 16 children. Grandmother Hecker was a skillful midwife, and I have been told she never lost a mother to any of the many, many babies that she brought into the world. She was often on call in the farming community where they lived. They brought all the children of our family except our brother Tommy. Her wonderful, skillful hands got us into the world safe and sound. She believed in absolute cleanliness and direct action. Her mothers never got childbed fever. Once when our brother Fred was choking on a cracker, she saved his life by reaching way into his throat and dislodging it. Grandmother Hecker was a great conversationalist, had many stories of her varied experiences. You just felt good when you were with Grandma. She liked good clothes, good beer, and good visiting. She had a beautiful black plush cape, and she wore little bonnets. One dark night when she was at our house, she walked out onto the side porch, down the steps, and right into a deep ditch, which had been dug there for some reason. There was Grandma, black plush cape and bonnet, amply built, wedged into that ditch. How she laughed! She was unhurt, and it took strong men to get her out. Dear Grandma, you lived over 89 years. One of our summer vacations was when we went to our cousin's home in the country. She lived in a house that was formerly the Hecker family home and our mother's early home. This was about an afternoon's drive west of Marion, and our Uncle John Hecker came for Helen and me in his big black surrey, or a light 4-wheeled carriage. He bought bananas to eat on the trip, and they were a real luxury. We had great fun on that farm, the big old house, the huge barn, the fields, and the woods. We slid down the straw stacks, plugged a green watermelon in a patch hidden in a cornfield, rode our cousin's pony, climbed into the haymow where the pigeons lived, gathered eggs from the nests of squawking hens, took walks in the woods where fragile little ferns with black stems grew, passed an old stump where bluebirds had nested, walked down the road in the front of the house in our bare feet, and wiggled our toes in the warm, deep dust. There was an apple orchard beyond the barnyard, and we stuffed ourselves with apples. A wonder we didn't get awful stomach aches. Our aunt had a big wood-burning stove in her kitchen, and out of that oven came big, wonderful cookies with scalloped edges and red sugar on their tops. I think she used sour cream to make those cookies, and it was rich and thick, for she skimmed it from big stone crocks she kept in her summer kitchen. There were times when we were growing up that our mother needed extra help, and one of her recruits was Grandma Hoffman, no relation to us. She was tall, gray-haired, wrinkled, and I remember that she had a big wart on her nose. My, but she seemed ancient. In contrast to her was another one of Mother's helpers, Pearl Toman. This young woman appeared on our doorstep one evening asking for work. It was shortly before our brother Ted was born, and she proved to be a godsend. She was a fine cook and knew just how to manage a family. Our brother Fred was about 2 years old, just learning to talk, and he called her Tail. She became our second mother for weeks after Mother's precarious time, when our brother Ted was born. Most of us were pretty healthy while we were growing up. Our family doctor brought to the attention of the Marion Medical Society that $3 was the family's medical bill for an entire year. Of course, our grandfather Hecker, a homeopathic physician, was called in for minor illness. He would bring over little vials of herbs and medicines. I think wormwood was one. Would put a little of this and that into a glass of water, and we usually felt a lot better after taking a round. Castor oil, undiluted, was a panacea for some ailments, and how we hated it. Homemade camphorated oil was used for colds. When I was 6 years old, our grandfather Hecker died. I think he was past 70, and my grief was intense, for we had been great friends. He called us his "lovely girls," and often gave me rock candy when we visited on the big kitchen stone in his yard. The whole clan sorrowed, parents, children, uncles, aunts, cousins. It really was a clan, for grandfather had given each of his children a lot in the neighborhood of the Hecker addition. One good friend of our grandfather's was Dr. George T. Harding, the father of President Warren Harding. Another loved relative was Aunt Susie. She was our mother's sister and had no children of her own. She took her nephews and nieces under her wing and for years taught little children in the German Methodist Church. She used to give big parties for them, and the neighborhood kids came too. She had wonderful Christmas Eve parties for the relations at her house. When she and Uncle John opened their big parlor doors, there was that gorgeous evergreen tree, reaching almost to the ceiling, and glowing with dozens of bright candles. Santa Claus would burst in, make the rounds of the group, and listen while we sang songs or spoke pieces. Then we had to account for past behavior and listen to his admonitions for our future conduct. The presents were then distributed, and Aunt Susie presided over everything with warmth and happiness. Dear Aunt Susie, she had a heart as big as the world, and she had a long life, over 100 years. When Uncle John Reidenbaugh and Aunt Susie took summer trips to Duck Lake, Michigan, they usually took one of us along. In the summer, they took me a whole new wonderful world of nature greeted my young eyes. Shimmering lakes, dark woods, rushing streams alive with speckled trout. Fishing was real sport, and we had wonderful meals of lake pike. That trip remains a beautiful memory. Our sister Mary was the oldest in the family, and we all looked up to her, and she was kind and generous to us. She was an excellent student and a great reader. Some of her favorite books were by George Eliot, Victor Hugo, and Charles Dickens. Her favorite retreat was on a big limb on the apple tree outside the kitchen door. Here she entertained her friends, and she had a great gift for making friends. One I remember especially was a fine musician, Marjorie Owen, and when she played the piano, we loved to listen. Our brother John was a lover of horses, and spent a lot of time in our grandparents' barn standing beside them. One special big roan horse was old Billy. When Billy stomped, John stomped. When Billy whinnied or snorted, John tried to. When Billy ate hay, corn, or oats, John did after a fashion. And when Billy died after overeating green corn, John almost died too. It had been a common sight to see John's small figure astride that big horse, riding bareback, flying down Windsor Street. John was a fine gardener. As a small boy, he tiled our backyard. His garden supplied fresh vegetables for our table when they were in season, and Mother canned the overflow. She was a great canner, fruits, vegetables, and crocks of jelly. Grapes for jelly, jam, and juice came from the long grape arbor beside the garden. There were pink, white, and purple grapes on the vines, and we used to go out there after school and have a quiet feast. Our sister Helen was musical, artistic, and romantic. She and I started music lessons early in our lives and studied with Grace Durfee. Her home was a place of culture, especially her small grand piano. I think it was there that I heard Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata for the first time. I never did get to explore the Durfee backyard, which I had glimpsed through their garden gate. I started violin lessons on a small violin, and our father made me a small chin rest, which I prized. The whole family had to gather to listen to Helen and me play. Our brother Fred and I were pretty much two of a kind. We played, fought, and worked together, and were well matched, for I was 2 years older and could take my own part. I once shoved him into a tub of water on the side porch. Fred was very industrious, and he and I used to clean the coal bin in the woodshed. Did we ever get dirty? One day Helen got up on the roof of this woodshed and started to slide down. Mother came out, not quite in time to catch her, but no great harm came to Helen. Another interesting part of the woodshed was a cage of flying squirrels. Our father especially liked those squirrels, and it was great fun to watch them eating corn from the cob. To get back to Fred, one of his jobs was delivering milk for one of our neighbors who had a cow. This was right on Windsor Street, and I think we were customers. A lot of our food came from local sources: pork, potatoes, butter, and some apples from farms nearby. Our brother Ted was the quiet one, had unbelievable curiosity, was always tinkering and experimenting. He built a fire once right in the middle of an upstairs bedroom floor. A neighbor informed Mother that Ted had taken one of their bicycles apart. When he was about 10 years old, he was severely burned while cleaning paintbrushes with gasoline. His clothes on fire, he started to run, and a neighbor, Mrs. Hostler, saw him coming as she was hanging out washing. She wrapped a big wet nightgown around him and put out the fire. The doctor treated his burns with anaphlogistine, and proud flesh developed. It took months for the burns to heal. Grandmother came over one day and straightened out one of his burned legs so Ted wouldn't be crippled. Many a night I had told Ted his favorite stories before he went to sleep, and of course we all felt terribly sorry to see him in such pain and trouble. Our sister Lenora was born when I was 8 years old. She was a beautiful baby, but when she was a few weeks old she caught a severe cold, and from then on had a stormy babyhood. She cried a lot, and I remember taking her riding in a little red wagon to pacify her. When she was 2 years old, our sister Rachel was born. Black hair, dark eyes, white skin, and pretty. She was a good baby and didn't require much care. Our brother John adored her, and Lenore felt completely replaced and wanted our mother to, quote, throw Rachel out in the alley. When Rachel was just a toddler, she got over into our Aunt Molly's yard next door. There was a hive of swarming bees over there, and Rachel got stung hundreds of times. When our mother saw what was happening, she rushed over, took Rachel in her arms, bees and all, and flew into our aunt's kitchen, where there was a pump in the kitchen sink. She told our aunt to pump water, gallons of it, over Rachel to drown the bees. During this time, the bees were stinging our mother too, but only then did she think of herself, and told our aunt to pour water over her too. Such was our mother. Shortly before my 18th birthday, our brother Tom was born, a fine little boy and the last of the children. I really didn't grow up with Tom. There was such a difference in our ages, and I was off teaching school in the country the first years of his life. We loved the new baby, though. Father read to him, and he was cherished by our mother. Our father's sister, Annette Lenore Zuck, we called her Aunt Nettie, was a regular visitor at our house. She lived and worked in Cleveland, employed for years by the Bourne Fuller Company. She was a great traveler, and her visits to our family were keenly anticipated from the time we knew she was coming until we heard the train whistling that was bringing her into Marion. She was a collector of beautiful things during her travels, brought Helen and me little silver lockets from Mexico, brought gaily striped blankets from Rome. Mother was good to our aunt and went out of the way to have wonderful meals when she visited us. Our mother was a fine cook. She knew what foods go together to make good meals. I remember the chicken dinners. She fried the chicken in a great big iron skillet. Her strawberry shortcake, biscuit dough, light and feathery, and the big homegrown strawberries. It was a gourmet delight. She made wonderful plate-sized sweet milk pancakes and good German potato dandelion salad. But of all Mother's culinary art, her bread baking was perhaps the most famous. She usually baked twice a week, usually 12 loaves at a time. Big open textured golden loaves that are still a wonderful memory. She made coffee cakes and cream kuchen when she baked bread, and they too were delicious. Some of my favorite books were Louisa May Alcott's Little Women and Jean Stratton Porter's The Girl of the Cimberlost. I love the stories and poems in our school readers. Some of those poems still come back to me. Spell downs were my pride and joy. Once a year, the family went on a one-day excursion to Cedar Point. We got to Sandusky by train and took the boat over to the point. The bathing beach was the big attraction, for the amusements and concessions were pretty crude. As for going to Lakeside in my early years, I remember being there only once with Aunt Susie and Uncle John. Uncle John loved to fish, and he caught buckets full of catfish over at Bay Bridge. It wasn't until high school years that I waited table at Hotel Lakeside for 2 summers. The summer of my 13th year, our house was remodeled. Bathroom, patio, new stairway. While this was going on, the family lived in a big tent in the backyard. One beautiful night, there was a magnificent display of northern lights. The whole sky was blazing with trembling, flashing colors, and it was light as day. Never before or since have I seen anything like it. We thought the world was coming to an end. A big event in Marion was the annual Summer Chautauqua at Garfield Park on East Center Street. We had a big tent, and along with our Aunt Sophie's family, we camped on the park grounds. It was at this Chautauqua that I heard William Jennings Bryan and Madame Schumann Heink. I remember, too, a romantic young violinist playing humoresque. In high school, my favorite studies were Latin, ancient history, and geometry. I was in the high school orchestra and loved playing girls' basketball. It was in those years that automobiles began to appear in Marion, and a whole, more sophisticated way of life was beginning. Uncle John Reidenbaugh had a big white steamer automobile, and you could hear him coming when he was blocks away, turning the corner into Windsor Street. Theodore Roosevelt was U.S. President 1901 to 1909, and William Howard Taft 1909 to 1913. But in 1912, Theodore Roosevelt was again in politics, campaigning for the Progressive Party. I got to see him when his train stopped in Marion. I don't remember any of his speech, but it was a thrill just to see that great man who had done so much for preserving the natural beauty of our country. There he stood on the rear platform of the last car of the train, wide-brim hat, prominent spectacles, bubbling with enthusiasm, shouting in his high-pitched voice. He didn't become a candidate, though. In that election, the Democrats won, and Woodrow Wilson became the 28th President of the United States. During his presidency, we entered World War I. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. When troop trains passed through Marion, some of the boys would get out, and there was much hugging and kissing with the local girls who had gone out to the railroad station to wish them well. After high school, I became an early member of the Marion Lecture Recital Club and was part of a string ensemble group. I remember one program in which I played. It was at the Grand Theater, and I had the prettiest dress of my life for the occasion. When I stood on the front of that stage with my violin, organ, and piano in the background, I was scared to death, but it must have gone fairly well. Anyway, my beautiful rose chiffon dress was just right for a Sigma Nu fraternity dance, at the Holland Hotel in Cleveland. Fred and Ted were in Western Reserve then and had invited Helen and me to come for the big night. We had a wonderful time, especially when I danced with a tall young doctor who was there. It was during Fred and Ted's years at Western Reserve that they became very fine banjo players. Were in some theater bands in Cleveland and in amusement park bands in Ohio. Once in a while they would bring friends home, and Mother would entertain them royally. When Fred, Ted, Helen, and I got together, the house was filled with music, even to the entertainment of people passing by the house. The summer after I graduated from high school, Helen and I went to Kent State for teacher training, and during that summer our brother Tom was born and I got my first teaching job. It was in Grand Prairie Township north of Marion. I started teaching in a red brick, one-room country school shortly before my 18th birthday. There were children in most grades 1 through 8, a room full, for the consolidated school. They were supposed to enter had not been completed. There were 4 or 5 first graders, a real challenge to see those little ones lined up on the front bench, depending on me to teach them to read. And learn to read they did. We used the new education reading method, phonics and sight words. I made little pasteboard cards for each of them to study, and on these little cards were the same phonics and sight words that were on the big flashcards we used for a reading drill. There were big country boys in that school studying agriculture. I had to study to keep ahead of them. Our sister Mary had married, and she and her husband Frank lived in the country, about 2 miles from my school. I lived with them during the week and had to ride a bicycle to school. During the year, they moved within about a half mile of school, and I walked through fields and over a rail fence to get to their house. I went home weekends, took the interurban, and Lenore often came uptown to meet me at the station. We would stop on the way home at Rocker's Bakery for something good to eat, cream puffs or oatmeal cookies. Early Monday morning, I took the 6 o'clock interurban car back to teach again. It let me off about a mile from school, and I walked down the country road, sometimes to find that the boy I had hired to build a fire hadn't done it. So to the wood pile, and soon a fire was going in that stove in the middle of the schoolroom, and it was warm when the children came to school. At the end of the year, we had a big picnic, and so ended my first teaching adventure. The next year, the new consolidated Grand Prairie School had been finished, and I taught 3rd and 4th grades there. The following summer, I worked in the office of a war plant in Bucyrus, Ohio, and spent the noon hour practicing violin at a nearby house. In the fall of 1918, Helen and I entered Oberlin Conservatory, and I was on top of the world. I had been able to sing since early childhood and had studied violin for a number of years. Professor Kessler was my violin teacher. He was handsome and married, but I think I was a little in love with him. I was in the first violin section of the conservatory orchestra, and my voice teacher had me sing a solo on a student recital program in Warner Hall. A whole new world of marvelous music was opening to us. On November 11th, 1918, World War I armistice was signed, and Oberlin went wild. Celebrations all over the place. On November 21, 1918, the main installment of the German High Seas Fleet surrendered, according to the terms of the armistice. This surrender took place on the U.S. battleship Wyoming, and on that ship our cousin Bob Hecker was a seaman. Bob was the one who had that all-day fight with our brother Fred when they were little boys. I had written to him occasionally after he enlisted in the Navy. When Helen and I went to Oberlin, we roomed together at Lord Cottage and a very cosmopolitan group of people ate meals there. There was great talent in the group, and on Sunday afternoons, impromptu programs were often given in the downstairs parlor. But to me, the heart of Oberlin was Finney Chapel. It was there that we heard the artists' concerts, senior recitals, and chapel programs. The conservatory orchestra practiced there, and that was when I participated personally in great music. After a year in Oberlin, I had to recoup my finances and so went back to teaching, this time in Marion City Schools. In the summer of 1921, Helen and I went to Yellowstone Park to work. When we applied for jobs, we had given Warren Harding for reference. No wonder we were hired. He was U.S. President. Our jobs were making the guests' beds and cleaning their cabins at Mammoth Camp. In the evenings, we helped entertain guests on programs at Mammoth Camp Lodge. We had a trio: Helen piano, a friend from Marion cello and violin, and I violin. I sang on some of the programs and loved doing it. No stage fright. One of the great people who was touring Yellowstone was Henry Van Dyke, and I still have a little snapshot of him. I was at a dance at Mammoth Camp. It was at a dance at Mammoth Camp that I met your grandfather, Doran. He was working at the government station about a mile from our camp. He had gone to Yellowstone with a fraternity brother from the University of Illinois. We were both 22 years old and were in a setting of great natural wonder and beauty. That summer was the turning point of my life. I had met my true love. We were married 2 summers later, June 9th, 1923, in Prospect Methodist Church in Marion, Ohio. So began a lifetime commitment that was to last over 51 blessed years. I became happily Gertrude Zuck Rea. Now here's some more writing by Gertrude Zuck Rea to Peter with Love, 1979. Living, Observations and Conclusions. Living is the science of balance, from an old Chinese proverb. A warm heart, an enlightened mind, a disciplined will. Dr. Hostetler, Heidelberg College, Tiffin, Ohio. We need someone to love, something to do, something to hope for. Gertrude Zuck Rea. Life is a gift. Cherish it. Give it your best. Share it. Gertrude Zuck Rea. Enjoy life. Whistle a lot while you work. Conversation in the Mountains. If you were to ask me why I dwell among green mountains, I should laugh silently. My soul is serene. The peach blossom follows the moving water. There is another heaven and earth beyond the world of men. Li Po, 8th century. In times of crisis, 1. Don't waste time by going to pieces. 2. Pray for guidance. Then 3. Act. Then 4. Keep quiet. 5. Take one day at a time. 6. Keep a familiar schedule. 7. A skillful physician and a wise minister can be your best advisors and friends. 8. Don't make the same mistake twice. Gertrude Zuck Rea. The ultimate beauty is a beautiful spirit, and your body is its home while you are on earth. It isn't so much what we do, but what motivates us to do it. Every man has a right to his own opinion, but no man has a right to be wrong in his facts. Bernard Baruch. Life has taught me patience. Security can come by exercising discipline. Happiness can come from having what we need rather than having what we want. Mortimer Adler. An intellectual. To be an intellectual, is it necessary to be a professional scholar? Is it necessary to write for esoteric journals? Is it necessary to be witty in argument, eloquent in conversation? I think it is safe to say that an intellectual is one whose acts proceed from definite moral values and high-quality ideas. Enjoy life. Sing a lot while you work. Respect reality. There is no right way to do the wrong thing. There are 3 facts of a living faith: the inner life of devotion, the intellectual life of rational thought, and the outer life of human service. Elton Trueblood in A Place to Stand. Prayers of thanksgiving are great expanders of the Spirit. None of us has the wit or wisdom to understand everything, except what you cannot change. Do we ever need faith in God so much as when tragedy strikes or when a life is snapped off unexpectedly? Faith no matter what. The deep, wordless recognition that what is must be accepted. This does not mean that God has abandoned us nor intentionally brought us grief. God would never deliberately bring harm to anyone. But if it happens due to wind or weather, lack of understanding or mistakes, then God has promises to keep. Life continuing, brighter, richer, ongoing life to compensate. We are close to our Creator when we come into the world. I believe His love cannot be crushed by the dominance of the human mind. It does not have to be proved by ears, eyes, or hands. If God revealed Himself thus, none of us would have to struggle. It would be too easy to have faith. Good news. The greatest step forward in leading a happy and successful life is through spiritual experience. It is deeper and more profound than falling in love. Something happens within you. You are filled with peace, warmth, and beauty. It may happen quickly and dramatically, or it may be a developing, unfolding journey. Either way, were not our hearts strangely warmed within us? Tolstoy described it, to know God is to live. To the unidentified ones in this little book who have contributed so much to my thinking, my gratitude, and to a dear grandson who wanted me to put it together, my love always, Grandma Ray. Now we have some comments here. The first is from John S. Ray, quote, I really enjoyed reading the many cogent sayings and advice of Mother. She had an excellent mind. Her memories of her childhood are especially interesting. Some of them I had heard and some I do not recall. I know that she would have been extremely pleased with this issue. An outstanding job, Mr. Editor, John S. Ray, Cleveland, Ohio. And the next is from Nancy Tyler, quote, Gertrude should have been a writer. What beautiful stories come alive. After reading this, I had many pleasant memories of times as a child of the Zuck family in Marion. I feel so privileged being a part of such a family. Nancy Tyler, Michigan. The next is from Alice Garcia. I really enjoyed reading the ZFMC number 12. I found the food for thoughts extraordinarily wonderful. These will surely help me whenever I'll experience difficulties in my day-to-day life. Maraming salamat, Alicia G. Garcia, Ni Ray, Quezon City, Philippines. The next is from Harold Freilich, quote, Volume 12 by Aunt Gertrude was absolutely fascinating. It certainly brought back to me wonderful memories of my childhood growing up years in Marion, Ohio. Harold Freilich, Portland, Maine. The next is from Rosa Chucalofa. Everything is wonderful. I have never come across such family memories collections before. All these have made a very deep impression on myself and my family. All your relatives will be familiar to us now. Such a nice tradition, these memories. Rosa Chucalofa, Tomsk, Siberia, Russia. Well, that concludes our talk today about the life of Gertrude Zuck Rea, my wonderful grandmother. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.